Hey everyone, Warwick's here. With BfA ending in about 8 weeks and everyone's eyes looking towards Shadowlands, I wanted to take a step back and look at the journey that each class had in BfA. Today, we're going to be looking at Warlocks. If this is your first retrospective video, welcome. I definitely encourage you to check out the rest of the series. The Priest video has a breakdown of how these videos work if you want to get information on that. Before we gateway into Warlock specs, I just wanted to note that you were looking at low-level footage because I do not have a Warlock at level 120. For this video and the last one in the series, the Rogue, you will only see low-level footage. I do not have all classes at 120. It doesn't change the information that we're going to discuss though. But let's get into Warlocks. We'll do their specs in alphabetical order, so Affliction comes first. Affliction Lock has been about putting up and maintaining as many damage over time effects as humanly possible. This has been the case going as far back as I can remember. The term spinning plates gameplay is as closely tied to Affliction Lock as it is nearly any other spec save maybe Shadow Priest. In Mythic Plus though, this gameplay style didn't work out well during BfA. Affliction had a hefty ramp up time this expansion, and trash mobs didn't survive that long, and boss fights were generally no longer than around 2 to 5 minutes. Potentially longer on tyrannical weeks as you got into higher keys though. As a result, Affliction was only getting started by the time the fights were ending. This damage profile made it extremely difficult for Affliction to feel good to play in Mythic Plus. Warlock utility was great, that was not an issue. Their survivability was great, that was also not an issue. For Affliction, it was simply its damage profile didn't match the style of dungeon that Battle for Azeroth encouraged. Grade D. In Raid, they were a complete 180 from Mythic Plus. The longer raid fight situations made it so that Affliction could ramp up their damage and maximize their major cooldown, Summon Dark Glare. In fights with spread adds or council-style boss fights, Affliction really shined. Coupled with Gateway, Healthstones, Demonic Circle, good personal defensive and unending resolve, all of this made them really valued raid members. It wouldn't shock you to see 2 to 3 Affliction locks in those types of style of fights. The biggest downside was that if the fight wasn't perfectly designed for Affliction to shine, then most Warlocks just went to one of the other specs that fit, say, like a pure single target fight better. I don't think this is a bad thing for pure DPS specs. I think it's good to have them change based on fight design, since they're still filling the same role. Except for you survival hunters, I'm sorry. Grade for Affliction and Raid is an A. Overall grade is going to be a B-. I'm going to give the grade for Raid a little bit more weight here. You had 2 very different experiences based on the content that you pushed. If you were a Raider that just did your weekly key, then you had a great time this expansion. If you were a Warlock main that loves Affliction and loves doing Mythic Plus, then you probably didn't play Affliction all that much this expansion. The changes in Shadowlands have done a lot to lower ramp up time. I expect Affliction to be a powerhouse early before getting nerfed, just like it did after Uldyr's raid tier. But let's move on. Demonology Warlock is next. Demonology had a complete revamp coming out of Legion. At its core, it had what I thought to be a very satisfying gameplay loop with Shadowbolt, Hand of Gul'dan, Cauldron Stalkers, and Demon Bolt all interplaying with each other. It was one of my favorites this expansion to actually just play from a mechanical standpoint. There was a lot of weird, potentially degenerate gameplay that came along with the spec as the expansion wore on, but let's look at how they performed. In Mythic Plus, they had periods of time where it seemed like they were possibly the choice spec for Mythic Plus. They were mostly a turret style spec like Elemental Shaman, where most of your spells are hard casted and not instant. If you got to plant for a trash pack or a boss, you could really pump damage. As the keys grew and the mechanics became more dangerous, Demonology began to fall off. Like Affliction, there was some ramp up time, though it could be decreased if you chain pulled. They lacked an interrupt as they couldn't use the Fellhunter pet because of the DPS loss that would come from not using the Felguard pet. Overall, I think they just failed to hit the mark in Mythic Plus this expansion. They had builds and setups where you could abuse Imp Pathing to drop a monstrous Demonic Tyrant cooldown, but that's been fixed moving into Shadowlands. Grade for Demonology in Mythic Plus is a C. In Raid, they also struggled to break through. I think most of this though was fight design. They don't work well in spread cleave situations as they have no dots and no effective way to put their pets on different targets. And they didn't work well in high mobility fights because they were generally a very hard cast spec. They only worked well on pure single type target fights and possibly type cleave fights where Hand of Gul'dan could AoE those type pack groups. then most Warlocks just went Destruction because it was better cleave. The other big struggle with Demo is that it is possibly the most gear-reliant spec of Warlock. It needed big haste numbers to shorten cast times and allow it to push as hard as the other specs. Some of the small bug fixes, such as making Imp spawn from Hand of Gul'dan instantly rather than on a delay, will be good quality of life changes and I think will help it in Raid next expansion. Grade for BfA, though, is a C. Overall grade then is a C. This one was a tough to grade because I think it's better than most people gave it credit for. That said, there was a lot going against it. There are thoughts that Demo is kind of the wrong playstyle for modern World of Warcraft. I'm not sure I agree, but the Shadowlands changes didn't look like they went far enough, and Demo looks like it doesn't really have a good Covenant choice, unlike Affliction and Destruction. It's definitely something that needs to be looked at, hopefully before Shadowlands releases. Finally, Destruction Warlock. Destruction Warlock is the low ramp-up time spec of Warlocks. As a result, a lot of tools for Destruction work really well for like big burst window moments, since you don't have to meticulously plan your ramp-up time. In Mythic Plus, this made them effective pretty much only when they had Summon Infernal up. Warlocks in general are cooldown dependent in Mythic Plus, and this makes them really feast or famine for effectiveness. Destruction is the spec that most epitomized this. When Infernals were up, they were as competitive as Fire Mages. When Infernals were not up, they were as good as Arcane Mages. The utility was fine, just like Affliction. The damage profile, though, just didn't fit the way that Dungeons ran this expansion, and Destruction really struggled. That said, it was the best of the 3 Warlock specs in Mythic Plus. That's not really saying much. Grade, C. In Raid, they were strong after 8.1. In 8.0, Affliction dominated, but Destruction wasn't considered bad, just overshadowed. Like all Warlock specs, they had great utility. A lot of fights favored Destruction Warlocks' profile. Tight cleave on 2 to 3 targets. This helped their sort of profile and community perception quite a bit in Raid situations. There's not really much to say about Destruction in Raid. It was just a very solid spec that excelled in a wide range of fights, and had strong damage with a massively powerful cooldown window, low ramp up time so you kind of got going early. It just worked really, really well for Raid situations. Even on fights that it wasn't necessarily perfectly tuned for, a lot of Warlocks just ran Destruction because they were just so comfortable playing it and they knew they were going to be okay no matter what the fight called for. So the grade for Destruction and Raid is an A. Overall grade then is a B. Destruction didn't see a ton of impactful changes like Affliction did going into Shadowlands. I think it will fall back into this space again after multiple patches of the next expansion. Tough to manage in Mythic Plus unless there's some sort of legendary Conduit Soulbind combo that plasters over the holes that this spec has. But they're going to be extremely solid in Raid, never a bad choice. If you have a Destruction Warlock in your Raid that you know is played pretty well, then I think you're always going to feel comfortable bringing them into a Raid. Overall, I do think Warlocks were one of the best Raid classes this expansion. All 3 specs found places that they could succeed in almost every tier. Demonology had the most struggles, but even then, you can find a high amount of successful demo locks in Mythic Raid teams. In Mythic Plus, they were so reliant on cooldowns that it crippled them. I'm not familiar enough with the changes overall to know if this is still going to be an issue moving into Shadowlands, though from what I hear, Affliction Warlock is going to be pretty popular. How did you rate Warlock's 6th expansion? Leave a comment below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Next up is the last video in this series, the Rogue. Until then everyone, stay safe, wear your mask, and I will see you next time.